Hi, everyone. I hope you are doing well and you had a great first week of school. It was great to meet some of you. Those of you who came to Zoom, thank you so much. And to read your introduction slides for those of you who did the Google introduction, if you haven't, please do so. And to see your perspectives on perusal. So everyone is off to a great start, I hope, and please reach out to me if you have any questions from last week. So in this week's video, I'm going to give you some feedback on chapters 1 and 2 and our first discussion on perusal. I'm going to talk to you about your research proposal check-in, which this week is going to be your research question, and then how to register for the city training that is coming up at the end of the month, and then leave you with your week 2 checklist, what we're going to be doing for the upcoming week. Okay, so chapters 1 and 2 were the introduction to educational research, and these chapters give a nice overview of really everything that we are going to be covering this semester. So a lot of the vocabulary that you see here in chapters 1 and 2, we're going to be circling back to, and they are going to be coming up again and again. So the main things that I want to make sure that I review with you that we're going to be coming back to throughout the semester is the difference between quantitative research and qualitative research. So we are going to be studying these two paradigms this semester along with mixed research that is combining these two approaches. So in our first two chapters, we talked about types of variables, including quantitative variables and categorical variables. And we also talked about different types of research. And one thing that came up in our Zoom discussion this week that I want to make sure that I reiterate here is that there is a difference between quantitative data and quantitative research. And similarly, there's a difference between qualitative data and qualitative research. So if you are familiar with quantitative data, you see this at work and day-to-day life, any type of numerical data, we see this all the time. Same thing with qualitative data. We might see interviews, we might read quotes, all types of different types of qualitative data. However, just because you are observing or reading quantitative or qualitative data, that doesn't mean that it is necessarily rising to the standards of quantitative or qualitative research. So I created this visual. This is something that will be helpful definitely on the midterm and as you are crafting your research proposal, and also doing your article critiques this semester. So hopefully this is helpful for everyone. So this visual in the text, it talks about quantitative research being top down and qualitative research being bottom up. So I have the arrows here for you to remember. Now, quantitative research is confirmatory research and qualitative research is exploratory. So the main thing that you need to know in order for quantitative data to be used and be considered quantitative research, it has to deal with some type of hypothesis testing. So these are the three main steps that quantitative researchers go through when they are planning and then carrying out a quantitative study. So the first step is to state a hypothesis. And this is something that we're going to be learning about this week in chapter 4 and 5. In quantitative research, it is primarily aimed at testing hypotheses or understanding the relationship between variables. So when quantitative researchers start off, they start off, of course, in the literature, and then whatever their research topic is, they are proposing a study to understand the relationship between two variables. And so first they step their hypothesis, and then they collect data to test that hypothesis. So it's confirmatory because it is all about either accepting or rejecting these hypotheses based on the data that are collected. So that is what you need to know about quantitative research. It is confirmatory research that is testing hypotheses. So you have to have something in there where you have your variables and you want to understand the relationship between them. And there's a lot of different ways to plan and design quantitative research that we're going to be talking about this semester. And then qualitative research is considered exploratory and inductive research because it starts with there are no variables or hypotheses in the sense that there are in quantitative research, but rather the researchers are exploring or investigating a phenomenon based on making observations. And this observation step is, what is the data collection? It could be an interview, it could be an observation, it could be documents. That qualitative data that is being analyzed, that is considered the observations that qualitative researchers are collecting. So next, qualitative researchers, once they have their observations or their data, they study those observations for patterns, and then finally they're making conclusions or generalizations based on those patterns. So I'll think of, if I think of a more creative way to have these arrows make sense from top down to bottom up, I will do that. But this is here for you to keep those in mind, because this is something that's very important in the course, that you understand the difference between quantitative research and qualitative research, and what the purposes of each are, and what the main components are for it to be considered a research study. So in chapter 1 and 2, we got the foundation, the different types of research, one of which was action research. And several of you mentioned that you were interested in action research most specifically. Now, chapter 3 does cover action research. So for those of you who are interested, I strongly encourage you to take a look at chapter 3 to deepen your understanding of action research. There's an entire course at Georgia State about it as well, if that's something that you're interested in. Now, the good thing about our text is that at the end of every chapter, there will be an action research connection, so you can apply the concepts from that chapter to action research. But I'm going to do a little mini lecture here, just so everyone has a cursory understanding of action research. So action research is a type of applied research. So in the first chapter, the authors talked about a continuum from basic research to applied research, and most research being somewhere in the middle. Action research is a type of applied research, and it's focused on a cycle that practitioners do in their actual setting. So it is all about practitioners having a research mind to help them investigate problems that they are facing, collect data, and then make decisions based on the data that they've collected and the analysis that they have done. So in terms of teachers, if they are doing action research in their practice, in their craft, they're taking on a researcher's attitude and constantly testing new ideas. So this is something that's common in nursing, it's common in teaching and other disciplines as well, where the practitioner can take on a researcher's mind. So this is a cycle that you will see in chapter 3. If you take a look about the action research cycle that practitioners are engaging in. And as you can see, you can, it's a recursive cycle. So it's something that is continuous. So they mentioned you can start wherever you want. So it might make sense to start with an observation. What is going on? What are you noticing? Reflect, what does this mean? What do you want to do next? And so based on those observations and your reflections, you plan some type of intervention or program that you are going to try and see if that has a positive effect. Then you're going to act, you are going to carry out whatever your plan was, and then you are going to, again, observe, see if it worked. If so, do you want to refine it further? If it didn't work, how can you come back? So this is the action research cycle. Now, when we are talking about basic research versus action research, and then even to some extent applied research, this chart kind of helps you understand some of the main differences. So we learned in our first perusal assignment that basic research is focused on expanding scientific knowledge, theoretical knowledge, and basic understandings of overarching principles. So the goal is to produce knowledge, something that is very generalizable, can be applied to a lot of people, things like motivation, things about development, things about socialization theory, personality. Versus action research, and it is a type of applied research, is very focused on a local setting. And it is a combination of both research and taking action to carry it out. Now, applied research is also in a specific setting, but it also can be generalizable to other similar settings. So there are many different types of action research for those of you who are interested, and chapter 3 goes into a little bit more detail about each of these. I know that someone mentioned that they're interested in feminist action research. Caitlin has a great comment in perusal if you see that there. Another type of research that I've done is participatory action research. And so that's where you have a team of practitioners that are working together to solve a type of problem. In my case, it was a team of third grade teachers that were working together to carry out a particular unit and design that together, collect data and reflect and make changes moving forward. We talked about orientational research in the first perusal. So critical action research would be a combination of both action research and an orientational research. Same with feminist action research, there's overlap there. Action science, and then appreciative inquiry. So with those action research different types, they can answer different questions and can be applicable based on what the research purpose is and what the problem is, and then the specific research question. And you'll see more about that as we move into our second perusal in chapter 4 and 5, developing research questions and writing research proposals. So, of course, with action research, many of the strengths, the reason why it appeals to a lot of people, and a couple of people mentioned this in the comments, it can be conducted by practitioners. So teachers or nurses, as I mentioned, who are very invested in the outcomes of the students that they're working with or the adults that they are working with. It can be conducted by them, and it is really a strength because it is encouraging practitioners to engage in this research process and collect data, analyze, and make judgments based on that. It can be very empowering as well because teachers are positioned as professionals where they're able to make decisions about their own craft. So weaknesses, I don't know if I would call it weaknesses versus maybe just other things to note about it. Difficult to generalize. So just because something works in one setting, the goal of action research is not for it to be generalizable. It's to make a positive impact on the people that the practitioner is working with. So that I wouldn't consider it a weakness because that's not really their purpose. So it can be limited because, of course, it's just within this one scope, and it's not using approaches like an experiment, so there's no control group, and I think this will make more sense we continue to read. So they're saying it often uses a weaker research design, and that is because we read a little bit about controlling for extraneous variables. However, like I mentioned, that's not really the aim of action researchers. So for them, as long as they're keeping their purpose specific and designing their study that reflects their purpose, I wouldn't worry too much about these being weaknesses, but it is something for you to know when you are choosing the type of research that makes sense for your goals with your research. And another thing that I wanted to highlight from the chapters 1 and 2 is this quote from the book about prove. So researchers don't use prove. That's not something that is that you will see. You won't see phrasing like these data prove that. Instead, we see research as evidence either supporting or evidence against a certain claim. So when you are collecting data and analyzing it through research, that is considered evidence. Evidence that either indicates that something that a claim is true or is not true, but research doesn't prove, it's just collecting data. And so we will see a lot about this when we get to the analysis chapters and learning about how to analyze data and what the results of different statistical tests or different qualitative approaches to analysis mean in terms of either finding evidence that supports a claim or doesn't support a claim. So that's something to note, to keep in mind when you are both designing your research proposal and critiquing research that we do this semester. Okay, so the last thing I want to leave you with is this research typology that we covered in the first two chapters about the different methodological paradigms and the different research methods associated with them. And like I mentioned, we are going to be going into depth into these paradigms and the specific methods. So I started off this review with a review of the paradigms of quantitative and qualitative. And of course, mixed research draws on both of those paradigms to design studies that are both confirmatory and exploratory. So in the discussion of quantitative research, the authors talked about experimental research, where you are using random sampling and you are having a control group and you are controlling for extraneous variables. And then non-experimental research, where you are not manipulating the independent variable, and researchers can use controls as techniques in non-experimental research to strengthen those as well. And then in mixed research, the authors briefly talked about one component of designing this type of research is concurrent, meaning that the data are collected at or around the same time, or sequential, meaning that perhaps the quantitative data portion is collected first, analyzed, and then next the qualitative data is collected to further inform, or vice versa. And then in qualitative research, the authors quickly described each of the 5 methods that we are going to be learning about this semester. Phenomenology, focusing on understanding the essence of an experience for either one or multiple individuals. Ethnography, focused on immersing yourself into a culture to really understand what it's like to be either a member of that culture or some of the main attributes. Narrative inquiry, where the researcher is engaging with the participant to learn from their lived stories as a source of data. Case study, where they are focusing in on a specific example or a case of something to understand how it works or the components. And then grounded theory, which is the most unique for qualitative research because it is focused on it's more of a deductive approach in that it uses the data collected to develop theories. So next I want to go to the perusal and talk about the multiple choice questions that we did for this week. Okay, so the first question is talking about the reason why it can be important to practitioners. Of course, we know that proving is not language that educational researchers or any researchers are using. And similarly, since it's not seeking out to prove, its guarantee is a synonym there. So it's not guaranteed to lead to better practice, but it can help practitioners reflect critically on those claims. And think about things that they are being asked to do or told to do, and just more critically engage with some of the research and the practices that are happening to them. Research focused on reducing inequality in society would be orientational research. So this is examples of this are feminist research, critical race theory, that is focusing in on understanding and decreasing power imbalances in our society. In the introductory chapters, we talked about the underpinnings of each of the paradigms, qualitative and quantitative, and the authors talked about some of the philosophy behind it, particularly with the paradigm wars. And one thing that they talked about was epistemology. And epistemology is the theory of knowledge and how knowledge is justified. And so this is something that you will oftentimes see in particularly qualitative research, sometimes in quantitative research, and definitely in research method texts and methodologies, is talking about the epistemology, how that method reflects a particular view of knowledge and how knowledge is justified. So for an example of mixed methods research, so mixed methods research is drawing from both qualitative or exploratory and quantitative confirmatory methods. So here we have in-depth interviews. That would be an example of an observational technique or a qualitative data source. And then creating a structured questionnaire. And so the questionnaire, since it's structured, it likely can be quantitated, meaning that it might have a scale of 1 to 5 where participants go through the questionnaire and they indicate how they think. So here you can see you're combining both qualitative data and quantitative data. They don't tell us what it's about. So here a quantitative questionnaire. So we know that that is, of course, quantitative, and then following up with a quantitative. So that would all be quantitative. Here, an in-depth case study sounds like it's qualitative to understand homelessness. And then here, a causal comparative research method. In the text, we learned that this would be associated with experimental research to explain why a group of students have been bullying other students in their dorms. So that would be an example of quantitative. So that's why this one is mixed methods, because it's using both interviews and a questionnaire. Now, an example of non-experimental research. Again, we are going to do a whole chapter about this and go further into depth, but in our beginning perusal assignment, we learned that non-experimental research means that the independent variable is not manipulated. So here, a researcher manipulates how students are taught statistics and then looks at performance on a post-test. So since the researcher is manipulating it, this sounds more consistent with an experiment, depending on how the participants are chosen. Here, a researcher manipulates how students are taught to solve word problems. So same here, we can see that the researcher is manipulating the independent variable. Here, a researcher looks at the correlation between reading speed and reading comprehension. So there's no manipulation of the independent variable. And this is an example of correlation, which we do know is one of the techniques that you can use for non-experimental research. And then the last one, a researcher assigns students with ADHD to one of 2 treatment groups, and then examines the impact of drug conditions on ADHD symptoms. So here we can see there's 2 treatments. Participants are being either randomly assigned. It doesn't say how they're assigned, but I assume that. So the correlation is an example of non-experimental research. And in chapters 1 and 2, in our first assignment, the authors talk about some of the weaknesses of correlation, that oftentimes that while there can be either a positive or a negative correlation between 2 variables, here the variables are reading speed and reading comprehension. So the research question for this might be, what is the impact of reading speed on reading comprehension? So oftentimes when there is a correlation, it's due to another factor. It's impossible to tell which happens first, which is the cause. So the authors do a nice job talking about some of the things to consider when you are looking at those correlation coefficients and when you are critically examining correlation. So which of these would be an example of experimental research? So here we're looking for something where the independent variable is being manipulated, just like A, B, and C. So here research studies the profiles of national merit scholars to determine what factors are associated with their success. So this sounds like a qualitative study. So the research question might be, what factors are associated with the success of national merit scholars? And so the researchers would collect all types of data or observations, then search for patterns, and then make some generalizations based on the patterns that they identified. So this would be qualitative, definitely not experimental research. A researcher does a study where he manipulates, okay, we know that's a key thing that goes with experiments, the type of memory strategies that students taught, and then measures their recall. So we know that this would be an experiment because one group of students is receiving one type of strategy and the other group is receiving what they know strategy, or maybe a standard strategy that's already being taught. So that sounds like it would be an experiment based on if we knew how the participants were being assigned to the groups. C, a researcher does a study where he examines the correlation between mathematics anxiety and time to solve mathematics story problem set. So that reminds us of number 5, which was looking at correlation. So this would be non-experimental research because the independent variable is not being manipulated. So a research question for this might be, what is the relation, or how does mathematics anxiety impact the time it takes students to solve a mathematics story problem? Let me say, so a research question for B would be, does X memory strategy increase students' recall on a particular test? So since it's an experiment, you can find evidence of a cause and effect relationship, so you can use that phrasing in your research question. And I'm trying to talk about research questions because I know that's something that we're focusing on this week and that you are going to be doing. I do recommend, if you are interested in doing quantitative research, that you look at table 4.6 from chapter 4, because it does have some great question stems that I'll talk about in a little bit too. I'll show you that. A researcher does a study where she carries out a survey that quantifies student beliefs about mathematics and follows that study up with a series of qualitative interviews with students. So here we have our survey, a quantitative survey. So it's a rating scale of some sort. So that's a quantitative measure plus qualitative interviews. So since they are using both types of data collection, this would be mixed research. And then lastly, so here are our qualitative research methods that we read briefly about. We'll go more into depth later in the semester. So Sarah's doing a study of how students adjust to a new country. She's going to let her conclusions emerge from her work. So this is very inductive, bottom up. She starts off with interviews of students and then generates some ideas from those interviews, then goes back and interviews staff from the program to further confirm her theory. So there's only one qualitative approach that's focused on generating theories. Helpfully, it's in the name, grounded theory. And so after she interviews, she goes back and interviews them to test her theoretical model that came from these observations. This process of building a theory inductively, letting the data drive the theory, is called grounded theory. Okay, so please let me know if you have any questions about any of these. If you have questions, you can put them in a different part of the perusal, or you can email me. Okay, so that is a review of chapters 1 and 2. Please let me know if there's other things that you want me to cover or clarify, and I will either answer you in perusal or a further video. Okay, so I want to end with talking about our upcoming assignments. So this week, we're going to do our first step in our research proposal. So that's one of the course objectives for this semester, is to be able to design a research proposal and write a research proposal. So we're really going to spend the whole course developing the expertise that you need to write a strong research proposal. And chapters 4 and 5 are going to help you with this process and help you understand the larger goal and all of the components. So we are going to be starting off this week thinking about what our potential research topic might be, the research purpose, and then practice writing the research question. So next Sunday on January 22nd on iCollege, you are going to turn in your potential research question. So someone already asked, is it okay if this changes throughout the semester? Yes. And that's something that's common for actual research as well, is that your research question and purpose, they refine over the course of planning and carrying out your study. So I'm going to be giving you feedback. I might give you suggestions that will help you further edit and refine your research question. But this is a first step for you to get started and think about what your research topic could be. So here is an example, and I'm going to show you a couple different visuals, and the text does this as well. So your research topic is your big idea, usually 2 to 4 words, like elementary literacy during COVID-19 virtual learning. And then you have your one thing that I have missing here, but it is in the text, is the research problem or research issue. So for this research topic, the issue would be many elementary school students faced challenges with their literacy instruction during virtual learning. So then the purpose is the application of the research topic. And in chapters 4 and 5, and in the second perusal, they go into depth. And in my lecture as well, I talk about the 4 main purposes. So you can choose a purpose that you want to be the focus of your study. So here you can see that the sample is to describe. So the purpose is to describe the impact of virtual learning during COVID-19 on elementary school children's literacy acquisition. And then based on your research purpose, you will develop your research question. So your research question will be focused and an empirical question that can be addressed through observation or some type of data collection. So it could be a how question, why, what, or which. So an example here, how does virtual learning during COVID-19 impact third graders' literacy acquisition as measured by the MAP assessment? And so depending on your research purpose, that will determine your research question. This is I think this is at the end of chapter 4. So this is an exercise that really we're going to be doing this week to help you develop your research question. So start off with your topic. This is a few words. The research problem that you're interested in. Since most of us will be doing applied research, think about the participants or the particular setting where you are seeing this research problem. And then the purpose of your study, describe, explain, predict, and you can reference the lecture and the text for this as well. And then your research question. And then if it is a quantitative research question, you will also have your hypothesis. Now, these are the main things that make up the introduction of your research proposal. Again, this is just a chance for you to get started and for me to give you some feedback. So if you are thinking of a quantitative study, this is the table that I recommended from chapter 4, table 4.6. It's some scripts for writing quantitative research questions. So they have one for descriptive questions, predictive questions, and then causal questions. I only just did a clip of this descriptive question so you could see. So when you are doing a quantitative research question, remember quantitative research is confirmatory. You want to understand the relationship between variables. So for instance, what is the relationship between variable 1 and variable 2 for participants? So this table is really helpful if you're struggling with your research questions. This can be used to help you. And again, I will be giving you feedback. So this is something that can change over time. So for this assignment, it's an ungraded check-in, but you will see here the directions here. I put this visual for you and then attached these 2 tools. Here's the entire table 4.62 if you want to see the predictive and causal questions. Now, if you're doing if you're doing a qualitative study where your purpose is to describe and you are going to be using qualitative data, your question will be more open-ended and trying to understand a particular phenomenon. And there are some examples of those in the text as well. Okay, so that is something we will be turning in this Sunday. Again, just get started. It'll be great for me to hear what you're interested in, and I can give you some feedback for that. So it doesn't need to be typed. You can just type right in the box in iCollege and submit there. So that is our first check-in. And so this will go along with your readings too. So as you're reading chapters 4 and 5, do be thinking about what you might want to propose for your research proposal. And then the next really graded assignment is going to be the city training. Now, the city training is a training that all researchers at Georgia State do to show that they have really interrogated the ethical principles that are necessary to carry out research involving people. So there is a link on the syllabus. There is also a link on the assignment in iCollege for how to get into the city program. So this is what it looks like when you are going to register. So when you click the link, you're going to click right here where it says register, the third option. And once you click register, you are going to be able to select your organizational affiliation. So Georgia State will pop up. You will agree to the terms of service, and then you will create your city program username and password. Now, once you log into the program, this is the course that we are going to be taking for our assignment for this class. And it is Group 2, the Social Behavioral Basic Course for how to conduct research involving people. So you will click here. As you can see, it's 12 modules. I do have an iCollege. I do have a study guide that you can use if you want to use that to help you study. And I can also help you if you come to our next optional Zoom. So after you complete this, so it's 12 modules, each module will have a short quiz. And once you complete that, you can upload it to iCollege. Now, your grade, it's a completion grade. So I'm not looking at your average for the quizzes that you take for each of the modules, but rather, did you successfully complete the course? So once you complete the 12 modules, you'll get this certificate. This certificate is what you will upload to iCollege. And again, you will get full credit for completing the program. It's again, not based on your module grade. So if you get an 80 on one module, don't think that that will affect your grade. I'm looking for completion. So that is due at the end of January, but I did want to talk about that. So you can go ahead and get in there and get started because it is 12 modules. So here is the checklist for this week. So by Sunday, September 22nd, you are going to read chapters 4 and 5 in perusal. There's also an introduction to part 2 of the book. I think it's pages 71, 72, maybe pages 71 to 75, but there are a few pages before chapter 4 and 5 that introduce this part. Do read those. That will definitely help you develop your research question. Then we are going to do the second perusal, which is worth 3 points, and you are going to turn in your potential research question to iCollege. We do have an optional Zoom coming up. We had a great turnout this week, so hopefully more people will join us. That will be Thursday, January 26th at 5:15. And then your city training is coming up on January 29th. So I am updating your grades for your first perusal. You will see an iCollege where it will say dropped. That's because there are 15 perusals and I'm taking the 12 highest score. So until we get to the fourth one, the first 3 will automatically say dropped. That's just how iCollege calculates that, since I am allowing you to drop your 3 lowest scores. So that's your checklist for this week. Please reach out to me via email if you need any help or have any questions, and I will be on perusal to answer any questions, and then on iCollege to give you feedback for your research question. Have a great week. Bye.